Well, on the sidelines of the World Economic Forum at Davos, the CEO survey from PwC, and we've got the two men who can give us a great perspective on what's happening in the world and India within that world. Bob Moritz, he's the global chairman of PwC, and Sanjeev, Krishan, chairperson of PwC. Gentlemen, thanks so much for joining in. Bob, interesting survey highlights. I would say it's not a surprise that CEOs are saying there's a recession. If you look at IMF or anybody else, they've all been talking about how growth is going to slow down. So in that wasn't a surprise. You think about, but what stood out was that a lot of companies saying that if they don't innovate, they don't know what the companies will be like 10 years down the line.
The headline this year is not the pessimism. That pessimism has been slowly building, and that pessimism, candidly, was already embedded in last year's surveys where CEOs were too optimistic because some of those headwinds were already rising. The big headline this year is 40% of the CEOs globally believe their business is not going to be financially sound in the next 10 years unless there's radical change. And we see that theme coming across all sectors. There's not a lot of variability depending on the sector, but we are seeing significant differences country to country around the world for various different regions. Whatever may happen in China, they're actually at the higher end of this concern about transformation. Why? Because their energy supply is going to change radically in the next 10 years. If you look at Brazil, they're at the lower end, which is, are they acknowledging the change? So the one thing I would walk away with is it's important to focus on not only the 40% that acknowledge the issue, what's equally as interesting, the 60% that don't say that.
Wow. Okay. Very interesting. So that's a great way to look at surveys being done as well, to kind of take it with a pinch of salt too, because some people may not be saying it, the whole thing. The other piece is that when I heard a bunch of US con calls, everybody talked about nearshoring. And here, unless I'm very wrong, in the presentation that you spoke about how people are saying that while there is a lot of talk of nearshoring, people are still looking to have the optimal supply chain. Now, tell us, a bunch of people out here are saying that China plus one is a thing of the past. Now there is a lot more happening on the supply chain management. What have you learned?
So in the boardroom, supply chain has become much more important, and CEOs are spending much more time thinking about it strategically. They are looking for more optionality and moving away from the dependency of China. It doesn't mean I'm going to go China plus one. It means I'm going to go China maybe, and plus a lot of others, including maybe nearshoring or bringing it back home. But in order to do that, they will look at options that have the following characteristics. It's economically sound, so the cost is very important, so you got to be effective and efficient. It's got to be resilient and able to scale up and scale down in a moment's notice. It's got to have security in terms of dependency to be there when I need it, and it's got to be greener than ever before, because those corporates are going to have to report on their green and their climate initiatives, so the suppliers of the supply chain have to do the same. And they are going to look for, and this is where I think an opportunity for India is, the labor force to be equally focused and adaptive to the changing needs, to be evolving and changing over the next decade or two.
Sanjeev, you want to comment on this one? How big an opportunity? Would it be India's game to lose?
Well, I mean, if you look at it, 67% of Indian CEOs are actually already saying that they are refocusing on supply chains, right? I mean, to the point that Bob made about greener supply chains. If I've made a commitment that I will be carbon neutral whenever, 2030, 2035, I cannot be carbon neutral unless my entire supply chain is carbon neutral. And if that supply chain, once I think about it being carbon neutral, there may be cost implications that may be there. So both the points that Bob said are actually very, in some ways, intertwined. So, and then to me, the good news is that 67% of Indian CEOs are saying that they are focusing on relooking at their supply chain. Yes, there is also a certain element of security. There's no question about it, that's on the one of the things on their mind. But also the fact that, when we talk, we're talking about transformation. We're talking about transformation, which is sustainable transformation today. And to me, I think supply chains is a key component of sustainable transformation that people wish to do.
Yeah, but the same problems hold for every country across the world. So if an Indian CEO would face that problem, so would a Brazilian CEO, an Indonesian CEO, or a Chinese CEO. So in that sense, again, I mean, the point I'm trying to make is that there is a lot of chatter around supply chains moving to India, make in India and make from India for the world. Do you sense that to be a real opportunity, which is India's to lose?
Well, I think we definitely have an opportunity. As Bob said, it could, we shouldn't say whether it's China plus one or Europe plus one. I think there's an opportunity, no question about it. I think what the government of the day is trying to do in terms of incentivizing businesses, both domestic and overseas, to come and set shop in India by way of giving a bunch of incentives, subsidies, etc., is a case in point. I mean, look at semiconductor itself, where there has been a policy now to sort of say that there is subsidy available, right? I mean, in some ways, we have seen the horrors of the past, whether it was, people couldn't get laptops, automobiles, and so on and so forth. So in some ways, that's very evident. Now, if it enables me to, get certain amount of import substitution done, and then also make India a producer to some parts of the world, if not the entire world, that's absolutely fine. So I think the government is focusing on both those at this point in time, to my mind.
If I can, I think India has the opportunity, it has the chance. It already checks the box, generally speaking, on the economics. It's going to have to continue to reinvent itself in that regard. It checks the box with a great labor source in terms of the talent necessary, and it is bringing technology more and more to that supply chain. It is much more seen as stable, relevant to other parts of the world. Where the Indian opportunity really is the fact that the CEOs are not focused on climate at the level it needs to be right now and getting it greener. Our own CEO survey would say the amount of CEOs that are really focused on it, lesser compared to then the rest of the world. That's where government and business now, both at the larger countrywide level with Prime Minister Modi and at the state level, if we can get focused to accelerate that, I think that's where the big opportunity is for them to be a potential supplier to the world of that supply chain.
It's interesting you mentioned the states, because the WEF guys told me on record that the highest number of registrations for bilateral meetings are happening with the 4 state ministers who come here. Now, one thing, Bob, your perspective here, will this be a factor of what happens in 2024, or could it happen earlier? Because just trying to understand, while the CEO confidence is one thing, can a dichotomy of growth happen wherein India or some of the other countries can grow at a much faster clip despite the Western hemisphere in the throes of a slowdown, and one doesn't know the extent of that slowdown?
I think personally that the Indian opportunity is great and can achieve the growth that they are looking to achieve in lieu of the global economy slowing down. It is a grab for market share right now, and it is an opportunity for business, both goods and services, to do things differently emanating out of India for the benefit of the world and be an asset to the world to tap into. That's equally as important on the manufacturing side, relevant to supply chain, as it is on services being centralized in India right now. So there's an opportunity to gain market share. There's an opportunity to ride any curve of growth. And I do think if India actually tries to address its main issue, which is how do I make it easier to do business in India? And they're doing that already. You're seeing the rise in some of the ratings. But continue that at an accelerated pace and coordinate better at the federal and the state level. I think that's a big opportunity for the country. And yes, they can overcome the concern about a slowing economy.
Okay, last 2 questions. Sanjeev, I'll get you into the penultimate one, which is an extension of what Bob said. A rise in the rankings and consistently for the past few years. The question is, do your clients and do CEOs that you talk about it being factually on the ground in the same fashion that the rankings have risen, or more needs to be done?
See, most certainly they see progress. Most certainly they see progress. Yes, I mean, you would expect that certain areas, like Bob said, I mean, contract enforcement, I mean, that's something which is there. I mean, anything which gets stuck in legislative procedures takes a while, right? So in a way, it's a story of 2 halves. The one half, you have somebody who has been in India long enough, who knows how to deal with the Indian ecosystem. I mean, I won't name businesses, but they're actually investing in a big way, very big way. Many people say that, no, are foreigners taking to the PLI? But they are. Some of these people who have been in India, they are actually embracing the PLI. But I think crossing the hump is still a bit of a challenge, and which is where Bob said is very relevant, that if we need to continue to work on ease of doing business in India, making ourselves more desirable. I think that's work in progress. I'm glad that there are half a dozen Indian lounges here, and hopefully they will now go back home and say that, okay, we have got everything done, we've screwed everything up, but we need to make it easier for them to come and do business in India.
3 things I would focus them on. Sanjeev has already hit one, which is making sure that the contractual obligations and the legal system around that have more certainty to it. Second is the green aspect, which we already talked about. And third is continue to enhance infrastructure more broadly. Wow. And that goes to transportation, it goes to ease of doing business, willingness to travel, et cetera. If the country can do more in those 3 areas, I think there's a lot of opportunity to rise in the relative rankings.
Cross fingers. One final question, Bob, and that is, we know that there are risks to growth any which ways. There is a slowdown up ahead. What can accentuate that risk? What's the factor that you're looking for? Is it a deeper US degrowth / recession, as the case may be, or Europe being in a similar fashion deeper than what you think of, or geopolitics, whether it's Russia, Ukraine, or in the East Asian hemisphere?
The biggest thing I think we want to look towards as maybe inflection points is going to be the resiliency of the US economy and its impact on the world, and how quickly China can flip its economy back to where it was previously.
So that's on the positive side.
That's on the positive side. On the other side is managing through continued geopolitical conflict. And that one in particular, when you look around the world, it's Middle East, relevant to the energy issues. It is resolution, if possible, relevant to the Russia-Ukraine thing, if not just containment and continued containment of that. And the last thing I would say is making sure the EU operates effectively and efficiently. You're starting to see a little bit of fragmentation come through that, and that's something to watch as we go into 23.
I heard you mentioned that in the presentation as well. But Bob, Sanjeev, thank you so much, gentlemen, for talking.
Happy to do it.
And a great survey. Looking forward to look at it in detail again.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Viewers, thanks for tuning in.